Hi, this is John Notgrass. If you'd like to watch a video version of this presentation that includes historic images and photographs, follow the link in the show notes. Thanks.
On today's Exploring History podcast, we'll look at the life of Laura Ingalls Wilder and hear several of the songs that Pa Ingalls played on his fiddle for his family.
Welcome to Exploring History with Ray Notgrass, a production of Notgrass History.
I'm Ray Notgrass. Thanks for listening. In our continuing celebration of this semi-quincentennial year, that is, the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, it is fitting to take a look at the life of a quintessential American, Laura Ingalls Wilder. Laura had a strong connection to the Declaration. In her book, Little Town on the Prairie, she describes a 4th of July celebration she attended in De Smet, Dakota Territory in 1881. She listens as a man reads the Declaration to the crowd, and she comments, Laura and Carrie knew the Declaration by heart, of course, but it gave them a solemn, glorious feeling to hear the words. After the reading, Paul leads the crowd in singing, My Country 'Tis of Thee. Then Laura thinks, Americans won't obey any king on earth. Americans are free. Today, our son, John Notgrass, takes us through the story of Laura's life, and he sings several of the many songs that Laura mentions in her books, songs that Pa sang and played on his fiddle for their family in their small, simple house on the prairie.
Hello, everybody. This is John Notgrass. I'm delighted that you've joined me today to talk about Laura Ingalls Wilder and her connection to the Declaration of Independence and some things we can learn from her life. I'm going to start out with a song that Laura mentions in Little House in the Big Woods and in Farmer Boy, Yankee Doodle. Yankee Doodle went to town a-riding on a pony, stuck a feather in his cap and called it macaroni. Yankee Doodle, keep it up, Yankee Doodle dandy, mind the music and the steppin', with the girls be handy. Father and I went down to camp along with Captain Gooding. There we saw the men and boys as thick as hasty pudding. Yankee Doodle, keep it up, Yankee Doodle dandy, mind the music and the steppin', with the girls be handy. There we saw 1,000 men as rich as Squire David, and what they wasted every day I wish it could be saved. Yankee Doodle, keep it up, Yankee Doodle dandy, mind the music and the steppin', with the girls be handy. And there I see a pumpkin shell as big as Mother's basin, and every time they touched it off they scampered like the nation. Yankee Doodle, keep it up, Yankee Doodle dandy, mind the music and the steppin', with the girls be handy. It scared me so I hooked it off, nor stopped as I remember, nor turned about till I got home, locked up in Mother's chamber. Yankee Doodle, keep it up, Yankee Doodle dandy, mind the music and the steppin', with the girls be handy. So in Farmer Boy, Laura talks about how Manzo went to a Independence Day celebration in Malone, New York, the town near where they lived. And you can see in the picture on the right, that's what the flag might have looked like at that Independence Day celebration. This was after Nevada had joined the United States in 1864, and so there were 35 stars. But since flags were made by hand, they weren't made on big production lines, the flags were often different. And so here's another example of what the flag might have looked like. So the stars were put in different arrangements depending on who made the flag. And so that might be the flag that Almanzo saw. And then after, let's see, was it Nebraska became a state, there were 36 stars, and so Laura in Little Town on the Prairie talks about going to an Independence Day celebration, and so her flag might have looked like this, or this, or this. Again, it's interesting to think about the variety of flags that people had because they were made by hand. I like to think about how different lives intersect with different aspects of history. And here's a genealogical chart that I made. It's available in our Laura Ingalls Wilder unit study, which is one of the online resources we offer. And so here's Laura, and you can see her parents, Charles and Caroline Ingalls. And then going back to Charles's parents, for example, were Lansford and Laura Ingalls. So Laura's grandmother was also named Laura Ingalls. There were they reused a lot of the same names in their family. So there are a lot of Lauras and Marys and Charleses, some Samuels. So if we go back to Laura's great-grandparents, Samuel Ingalls, for example, was born in 1770, and his wife Margaret was born in 1773. So they were born right before the American Revolution. And then Charles's maternal grandparents, Nathan and Eunice Colby, were also born around that time, and then Ma's grandparents, Joseph and Martha Tucker and William and Margaret Quiner, were also born around that time. And then Almanzo's grandparents, his parents were a bit older than Charles and Caroline, so Almanzo's grandparents were born around or shortly after the American Revolution. And so it's interesting to think about what stories they would have told their children and grandchildren about growing up during that time period in the 1770s, 1780s, 1790s. So let's see. All right, there we go. So Laura blessed the world in her 60s by writing a series of stories about her life growing up on the prairies of the Great Plains. Little House in the Big Woods was published in 1932, Farmer Boy in 1933, Little House on the Prairie 1935, On the Banks of Plum Creek in 1937, By the Shores of Silver Lake in 1939, The Long Winter in 1940, The Little Town on the Prairie in 1941, and These Happy Golden Years in 1943. Laura wrote a book that she called Pioneer Girl, which was a biography, an autobiography of her life, and she tried to get that published in the late 20s, early 1930s, and couldn't find a publisher for it. So her daughter Rose helped her get connected with a publisher who started with Little House in the Big Woods, and then Farmer Boy. And when Laura started, she didn't know that it was going to turn into a full series, but the books were so popular, kids wrote to her wanting more stories, and the publisher was glad to have more books that sold really well during the Great Depression and during World War II. And so I know those stories were encouraging for families that were going through those difficult times in the 1930s and 40s. And of course, Pa's fiddle was an important part of Laura's life that she shared. Pa would often play at the end of a long day. Sometimes the family would sing and dance along with him, or sometimes they just sit quietly and listen. But music was an important part of their life, and Laura mentions 127 different songs at different points, and I'm sure Pa knew even more than that. But it's a fascinating snapshot of American music, but also European music, and it shows lots of cultural influences. There were hymns, singing, group singing songs, ballads, some going back to medieval England, so it's a rich variety of music. One song I'm going to sing here is called Wait for the Wagon. Will you come with me, my Phyllis dear, to yon blue mountain free, where the blossoms sell the sweetest, then rove along with me. Oh, every Sunday morning my wife is by my side, oh, waiting for the wagon, and we'll all take a ride. Wait for the wagon, wait for the wagon, wait for the wagon, and we'll all take a ride. When the river runs like silver, and the birds they sing so sweet. I have a cabin, Phyllis, and something good to eat. Come listen to my story, it will relieve your heart. So jump into the wagon, and off we will start. Wait for the wagon, wait for the wagon, wait for the wagon, and we'll all take a ride. Together on life's journey, we'll travel till we stop. And if we have no trouble, we'll reach the happy top. Then come with me, sweet Phyllis, my dear, my lovely bride. We'll jump into the wagon and we'll all take a ride. Wait for the wagon, wait for the wagon, wait for the wagon, and we'll all take a ride. Wait for the wagon, wait for the wagon, wait for the wagon, and we'll all take a ride. So back before Spotify and iTunes and Apple Music, before iPods and CDs and radio, the only way that people could listen to music was either by playing it themselves or by listening to someone else sing it. Now there were music boxes, there were a few mechanical ways to play music that came along, but generally people had to either play it themselves or listen to somebody else play it. And so music passed from one person to another and passed down in families from one generation to another, and that's how people entertained themselves. Now, Wait for the Wagon, for example, is a song from minstrel shows. And as we think about Laura Ingalls' life and the sweep of American history, we need to be honest that there were some difficult things, some things that we look back on and cringe and wish that things had been different. So we can be honest about that without saying that everything that happened in the past was bad. We need to be honest about the good and the bad that's happened in the past. Now, minstrel shows were where white performers painted their faces black and did song and dance routines that were very racist. They used stereotypical dialect that was associated with African Americans, and they were demeaning. Some people might try to say they were recognizing African American culture, but they were demeaning, and they were often intended as a put down of Black Americans. So we can recognize that and be honest about that. And then, as the Ingalls and many other families were spreading across the Western Plains, we have to recognize that they were taking land from people who were already living there, such as this family of indigenous people from the Dakota Territory, where the Ingalls eventually settled in De Smet and spent many years together. So again, we can be honest about the good and the bad as we try to learn from the past to help us make better decisions about how we live in the present and honor God with the way we live our lives today. Laura's dad, Charles Philip Ingalls, was born in 1836 in Cuba, New York, and his family moved to a place near Chicago when he was about 12, and then they settled in Wisconsin, and that's where he ran into the Quiner family. Caroline Lake Quiner was born in 1839 in Wisconsin, and her father died in a shipwreck on Lake Michigan when she was only 5 years old. Her mother remarried, and she had several half-siblings. The Ingalls and Quiner families got to know each other and spent a lot of time together, and it ended up that 3 sets of siblings got married over the course of 3 years. So Ma's brother Henry married Pa's sister Polly in 1859, and then Charles and Caroline got married in 1860, and Ma's sister Eliza married Pa's brother Peter in 1861. And so that was right at the beginning of the Civil War, which affected both of their families in significant ways. Ma's brother Joseph joined the military, Wisconsin regiment, and he was wounded at the Battle of Shiloh and died a few weeks after the battle. And news was sent back to his family, and you can imagine how hard that would have been for Ma and her parents and siblings to get the news that their beloved Joseph had died in service to his country. Laura also talks about how Pa's brother George ran off to join the army as a drummer boy when he was a teenager. The records are a little murky. There were a lot of young teenage boys, even as young as 9 or 10, who served as drummers on both sides of the conflict. Here's a picture, for example, of a Union drummer boy. We don't know his name, and it's just so hard to think about those young kids facing danger and facing the challenges that all soldiers face during war. A couple of others of Pa's brothers joined late in the war and served with the 1st Minnesota Heavy Artillery, who were stationed at Chattanooga at the end of the war. The Civil War produced a lot of songs, and one of the most well-known from that time period was the Battle Cry of Freedom, which was published in 1862, and hundreds of thousands of copies of the sheet music were published, and it became very popular around the country. So I'll sing that song for you here, the Battle Cry of Freedom. Oh, we'll rally round the flag, boys, we'll rally once again, shouting the battle cry of freedom. And we'll rally from the hillside, we'll gather from the plain, shouting the battle cry of freedom. The Union forever, hurrah, boys, hurrah! Down with the traitor and up with the star. While we rally round the flag, we'll rally once again, shouting the battle cry of freedom. Oh, we're springing to the call for 300,000 more, shouting the battle cry of freedom. And we'll rally from the hillside, we'll gather from the plain, shouting the battle cry of freedom. The Union forever, hurrah, boys, hurrah! Down with the traitor and up with the star. While we rally round the flag, we'll rally once again, shouting the battle cry of freedom. Oh, we're springing to the call. Oh, we'll welcome to our numbers the loyal, true, and brave, shouting the battle cry of freedom. And we'll fill the vacant ranks with 1,000,000 free men more, shouting the battle cry of freedom. The Union forever, hurrah, boys, hurrah! Down with the traitor and up with the star. While we rally round the flag, we'll rally once again, shouting the battle cry of freedom. So we're springing to the call from the east and from the west, shouting the battle cry of freedom. And we'll hurl the rebel crew from the land that we love best, shouting the battle cry of freedom. The Union forever, hurrah, boys, hurrah! Down with the traitor and up with the star. While we rally round the flag, we'll rally once again, shouting the battle cry of freedom. We'll rally round the flag, yes, we'll rally once again, shouting the battle cry of freedom. So, meanwhile, Charles and Caroline got married in 1860. Meanwhile, Almanzo Wilder was born near Malone, New York, around 1857. There's a little uncertainty about his exact birth year. He did apparently fudge his age in order to file for a homestead claim, so it's a little unclear if he was born in 1857 or maybe a year or two before or after that. So Almanzo grew up in this home, which you can still visit. Here's a picture of Almanzo with his sister Alice around 1865. This is around the time that Farmer Boy is set. Laura places it in 1866, so right after the Civil War. And here are the reconstructed barns on the Wilder farm in New York. And the Wilders moved, the whole family ended up moving to Minnesota in the early 1870s, and here's a picture of their family. So James and Angeline were the parents. Laura Ann was the oldest, and Laura Wilder chose not to include Laura Ann in Farmer Boy, perhaps to avoid confusion, since she was also named Laura. And then Eliza Jane, Royal, Almanzo, Alice, and Pearlie Day was the youngest. He was not born when Farmer Boy was set, so he's not included in the story either. During the Civil War, Charles and Caroline Ingalls settled near Pepin, Wisconsin, near the Mississippi River. And you can visit a reconstructed cabin built on the land that they owned in Wisconsin at that time. When Laura was just a baby, about a year, Charles and Caroline purchased land in Missouri, and they headed south, and they lived there just for a little while. There are some historical records that place them there, and there's a historical marker someone has placed on the land. There's nothing else there to see. They soon decided to move on to Montgomery County, Kansas, and settle near the new town of Independence, which had just been established in 1869. And as we read in Little House on the Prairie, they encountered the Osage Indians, who were living there at the time, and they had been promised that as a place where they could live. During the early 1800s, the Osage Nation made 7 treaties with the U.S. government that, okay, so this is where you can live, and then no, it was changed with the next treaty, and they had to move somewhere else. So those treaties kept being broken, and they kept being forced to move to different locations. And so the Ingalls knew that they were settling on Osage land, and as Laura talks about in the book, Pa hoped or assumed that the government would force the Osage to leave once again, but that didn't happen, and they only stayed there for a little while. In the original text of Little House on the Prairie, this is what Laura wrote. She said, "There the wild animals wandered and fed as though they were in a pasture that stretched much farther than a man could see, and there were no people, only the Indians lived there." About 17 years later, somebody wrote a letter to Laura's publisher pointing out that the way this is written, it sounds like the Indians were not people, were not really people. And Laura immediately recognized, she said it was a stupid blunder, and they had allowed that to stay in the text. And so they changed it. They made a rare change to the text of Laura's book, and they changed it to say there were no settlers, only Indians lived there. From what I know about Laura's life and her attitudes, I don't think she meant to imply that the Indians were not people. Indeed, in Little House on the Prairie, she talks about the struggle she had in trying to understand the way white Americans moving in and how that affected the indigenous people living there. But this does reflect a cultural attitude that was prevalent at the time, that if the indigenous people got in the way, they could just be forced to move to make room for other people. And so that is a sad but real part of American history. You can visit a reconstructed cabin. This is the cabin that our family saw when we went there many years ago. This cabin fell into disrepair and has been replaced. I haven't been to see the new cabin. I don't have a picture of the updated one to share, but there are some other historic buildings that you can see on the Ingalls home site in Kansas. While they were there, Ma gave birth to baby Carrie, and the doctor in the area, Dr. George Tan, was likely there to help Ma to give birth. And he was an African American who served in the Union Army during the Civil War and then moved west, and he worked among the Cherokee and the Osage people in Kansas and Oklahoma, which was known as Indian Territory at the time. And so Laura talks about him in Little House on the Prairie, and so that's an example of a black man who was respected and trusted as a physician. So after they'd been in Kansas for about a year, they decided to move back to Wisconsin, and they ended up moving back into the same house that they had left a couple years before. So the chronology of the Little House books is not exactly the chronology of Laura's life. So the Little House books tell Laura's story. They include real things that happened, but the chronology and the geographical details are not always precise because she did turn it into a work of historical fiction in telling her story. So they came back to Wisconsin when Laura was about 3, going on 4, and so the memories that she shares in Little House in the Big Woods, most of those would have happened on the second time that they were living in Wisconsin. So the town of Pepin is next to Lake Pepin, which is really just a wide place in the Mississippi River. And Laura talks about how Pa would go fishing there, and he would catch fish that were as wide as the wagon box. So there were some big fish in that lake. And I mentioned around this time the Wilder family were also settling in Minnesota. They lived in the town of Spring Valley, and you can see the large house that they built in the upper left picture there. That is no longer standing, but their barns are still standing. And the church that the Wilders helped to build, Spring Valley Methodist Church, is now a museum that houses artifacts from the Ingalls and Wilder families and other historical things from the town, which you can visit. So, in the 1870s, the Ingalls were living in Walnut Grove, and the Wilders were living in Spring Valley. So, the Ingalls left Wisconsin the second time and headed to Minnesota, and they settled on the banks of Plum Creek, as you read about in the book, by that title. And you can visit the area of the dugout where the Ingalls lived, which is on private land, but you can visit that outside Walnut Grove. So the next song we're going to do is The Gumtree Canoe. This doesn't have, this talks about a river on the Tombigbee River, which flows through Alabama, so it doesn't have a geographical connection, but it's about a creek or a river, so I like it, so I'll sing it here. The Gumtree Canoe. On the Tombigbee River, so bright I was born, in a hut made of husk of the tall yellow corn. It was there I first met with my Julia so true, and I rode her about in my gumtree canoe, singing row away row over waters so blue, like a feather will float in my gumtree canoe. With my hands on the banjo and toe on the oar, I sing to the sound of the river's soft roar, while the stars they look down on my Julia so true, and dance in her eyes in my gumtree canoe, singing row away row over waters so blue, like a feather will float in my gumtree canoe. One night the stream bore us so far away that we couldn't come back, so we thought we'd just stay. Oh, we spied us a ship with a mast of true blue, and it took us in tow in our gumtree canoe, singing row away row over waters so blue, like a feather will float in my gumtree canoe, singing row away row over waters so blue, like a feather will float in my gumtree canoe. So, while they were in Walnut Grove, the Ingalls helped to establish the Union Congregational Church of Christ in 1874, and Pa was elected as a trustee. Laura tells that when they wanted to buy a bell for the church, that Pa had been saving some money for boots, but he donated that money to help buy the bell instead, and that bell is still in Walnut Grove in the belfry of the English Lutheran Church now. Sadly, the Ingalls faced another challenge with the grasshopper plagues of the 1870s. Now, these were technically Rocky Mountain locusts, and millions of them descended on the Great Plains multiple times during this period. And there's a photograph on the left and then a cartoon showing the Grangers versus the grasshoppers, or the irrepressible conflict. So many families suffered like the Ingalls did, and their crops were destroyed, and they struggled to get enough to eat. And here's an illustration from Frank Leslie's illustrated newspaper around the area where the Ingalls lived from August of 1874. So the Ingalls decided to leave Walnut Grove. They had met some friends at church, the Stedman family, who were moving to Burr Oak, Iowa to operate a hotel, and the Ingalls decided to join them. Around this time, their son, Frederick, was born. Laura does not mention him in the Little House books, but she had a little brother, and so he was about a year old when they moved to South Troy, Minnesota. They lived with their cousins for a few months that summer before they met the Stedmans in Iowa. And while they were there, Freddie got sick and died, and they buried him there. There's a small memorial at a church in the area with some information about Freddie and about the Ingalls family while they were there. And my wife and I lost a son who was not quite a year and a half old, so we can imagine some of the pain, the challenges that Charles and Caroline and their family went through. Here's a song by Stephen Foster about losing someone you love, and it expresses some of the feelings that we have when we lose someone. Down on the Mississippi floating, long time I traveled on the way. All night the cottonwood a-toting, sing for my true love all the day. Now I'm unhappy and I'm weeping, can't tote the cottonwood no more. Last night while Nellie was a-sleeping, death come a-knocking at the door. Nellie was a lady last night she died. Toll the bell for lovely Nell, my dark Virginia bride. When I saw Nellie in the morning, smiled till she opened up her eyes. Seemed like the light of day a dawning, just before the sun began to rise. Close by the margin of the water, where the lone weeping willow grows, there lived Virginie's lovely daughter. There she in death may find repose. Nellie was a lady, last night she died. Toll the bell for lovely Nell, my dark Virginia bride. Down in the meadow among the clover, walk with my Nellie by my side. Now all them happy days are over. Farewell, my dark Virginia bride. Nellie was a lady, last night she died. Toll the bell for lovely Nell, my dark Virginia bride. So this is the building in Burr Oak, Iowa, where the Ingalls lived. It was operated as a hotel, and the Ingalls lived there and worked on the property. Ma and the girls worked in the kitchen, and Pa was a handyman working around on the building. Unfortunately, the hotel was not a financial success, and it closed, and they had to look for other work while they're there, and they had a lot of difficulty. Freddie had just died. Things were not going well financially, and Laura chose to leave this period of their life out of the Little House books also. So they ended up going back to Walnut Grove, and things were a little better for them the second time they were there. Here's a picture of my mom's mom, Evelyn Boyd, who got to travel with my parents to some of the sites, and I had her picture taken by this covered wagon. While they were in Walnut Grove the second time, the family joined the Independent Order of Good Templars, which was one of many fraternal organizations in the 19th century. This was one that allowed men and women both to join, and their primary focus was on temperance, on promoting abstinence from alcohol to secure a sober world. That was the mission of that organization. And the family sat for rare photographs while they were in Walnut Grove. You can see Grace over there on the left, Carrie, Mary, and Laura on the right. I'm not sure why they didn't take them all four together. You had to sit still for a while to get your picture taken back then. I guess they wanted Grace to have a chance to do it alone. Maybe it was easier to get her to sit still. So they tried farming again in Walnut Grove, but Pa got the opportunity to work for the railroad and decided to take that. And so here's the railroad depot at Tracy, Minnesota. The Chicago Northwestern Railway line was working west from Minnesota into Dakota Territory. And so they traveled from Walnut Grove to De Smet. And Laura spends a chapter in her book talking about how excited she was to go on her first train ride, and shares her excitement and getting on the train and traveling all of 7 miles. That was as far as the train went. And then the track stopped, and they had to Pa picked them up in a wagon to go the rest of the way to the new town site of De Smet. And they stayed in the surveyor's house that first winter they were there. And this is the original surveyor's house that's been, kept up and modernized, maintained, but it also has been relocated to a different location. So the hotel in Burr Oak is the only structure that's still standing in the original location where Laura lived when she was a child. And she also lived here, but it's not in the same location. So different historic sites like to brag about what they have that the other ones don't. But all of the Little House sites are amazing, and our family is very thankful for the volunteers and staff who work hard to keep them available for people to enjoy today. You can also visit the school where Laura and Carrie attended when they started there. And here's a bird's eye view of the town of De Smet, published in 1883, so about 4 years after the Ingalls first settled there, when the town had grown some. You can see the school over on the right, and then the Ingalls, the store building that Pa built on the main street through town. This picture is oriented facing south. South is at the bottom. And you can see the railroad track going along near the bottom of the picture. So this shows when that big blizzard came, while Laura and Carrie and the other kids were at school, they only had to walk a couple of blocks, but it was very dangerous because, you see there weren't a lot of buildings, and so they thankfully ran into buildings at the edge of town so they didn't wander across the railroad tracks and get lost in the blizzard. So here's a picture of that long winter that Laura talks about in the book. This was taken in Minnesota, but many feet of snow fell all across the region, and it made it very difficult for the trains to get through to deliver food and other supplies. So the Ingalls and other families really struggled during that time. But Pa talks about how the big sunflower was his treble song, excuse me, that he sang to keep his spirits up during that long winter. There is a charm I can't explain about a girl I've seen. My heart beats fast when she goes past in a dark dress trimmed in green. Her eyes are bright as evening stars, so loving and so shy. And the folks all stop and look around whenever she goes by. Oh, I am as happy as a big sunflower that nods and bends in the breezes, and my heart is as light as the wind that blows the leaves from off the trees is. As days passed on and we became like friends of olden times, I thought the question I would pop and ask her to be mine. But the answer I received next day, how could she treat me so? Instead of being mine for life, she simply answered, no. Oh, I am as happy as a big sunflower that nods and bends in the breezes, and my heart is as light as the wind that blows the leaves from off the trees is. I went next day dressed in my best, this young girl for to see, to ask her if she would explain why she had shaken me. She said she really felt quite sad to cause me such distress, and when I said, won't you be mine, of course she answered, yes. Oh, I am as happy as a big sunflower that nods and bends in the breezes, and my heart is as light as the wind that blows the leaves from off the trees is. Here's a map of Kingsbury County, De Smet Territory that became part of South Dakota. You can see the line of the railroad track that was being constructed through the area. You can see the lakes that Laura talks about in her books, Silver Lake, where the surveyor's house was located, and then the larger Lake Henry and Lake Thompson, where she and Almanzo went for many drives during their courtship. There's the town site of De Smet, and the Ingalls chose a homestead a little south of town, and Almanzo also moved to the area and chose a homestead site a little north of town. You can see cottonwood trees on the Ingalls, the original land that the Ingalls owned, that Laura talks about Pa planting. Their house, their homestead claim home is no longer there, but there's a small memorial there. And the Homestead Act and the Homestead movement was a huge part of American life for many decades, from the 1860s well into the 20th century. And the National Archives has millions of pieces of paper related to the homestead claims, and there are 24 pieces of paper just for the Charles Ingalls homestead claim. And so there's a conglomeration of them on the screen there, and they just have different, detailed information about where the tract of land was, and the person who applied for the homestead had to get witnesses who testified that he or she had fulfilled the obligations of that. And on the claim paper that Charles filed, you can see Robert Boast, who was a good friend of the Ingalls that Laura talks about in the books, and also Almanzo's brother Royal Wilder. And one of the other one is George Masters. I didn't mention, during the long winter, the Ingalls family actually had 3 additional people staying with them and surviving off their limited food supplies. George Masters and his wife and their young child were there, and George promised that he would pay Pa back for room and board, but George was a very rude guest, and he didn't help with the chores, and he sat close to the fire, forced his way, pushed other people out of the way to sit by the fire, and gobbled up more than his fair share of food. And so Laura felt like she would have kicked him out if it had been up to her, but Ma and Pa were very kind in letting George and his family stay there. And so George was one of the witnesses on Pa's paperwork. So I feel like Pa said to George, "You owe me one for putting up with you during a long winter, so I need you to sign this form for me." And when Charles originally filed for his claim, the clerk wrote his name as Charles V. Ingalls. His middle name is Philip, so they had to correct it to Charles P. Ingalls to make sure everything was appropriate when he finally got the claim. And Mary had gone blind while they were living in Walnut Grove and was not able to attend school, but they heard about a school for the blind in Vinton, Iowa, and were able to arrange for Mary to go there. The government of Dakota Territory actually paid Mary's tuition, and the Ingalls had to provide her clothing and pay for some of her other necessities while she was there. But she spent a total of 7 years at the school and did very well. She was a great student and got along well with her classmates. She kept in touch with some of them by letter after she came back to De Smet. The building that used to be the Iowa College for the Blind is still there. It's no longer used as a residential school, but that it served as a school for many years. And Almanzo was several years older than Laura, and she did not at first think of him as a potential suitor. She was more drawn to Cap Garland and some of the other young men closer to her age, but Almanzo was very persistent, and like the fella in the Big Sunflower Song, he eventually persuaded Laura to say yes to become his wife. And they were married on August 25th, 1885. Their daughter Rose was born on December 5th, 1886. They had a series of challenges. Their home and barn caught on fire. They lost their crops. They both got sick with diphtheria, and Almanzo had a stroke during his recovery. And so they had a really hard few years, which Laura talks about in the first 4 years, which was not published during her lifetime, but was published long after her death. So they struggled with that, and they moved to live with Almanzo's parents in Spring Valley, Minnesota for a time, just trying to recuperate. They spent some time in Florida, hoping that the weather would be better and help Almanzo regain his health, but Laura did not like living there, and so they only stayed there a little while. But you can visit the church that they attended while they lived there, and there's a little park that some descendants of the Wilders, some of Almanzo's nieces and nephews and their descendants, built several years ago. So they came back to De Smet and started saving up to have a new start. And here's a special picture that the family took around 1894 when they were all back in De Smet. Mary had come back from her studies at the college, and Laura and Almanzo and Rose were back in town. So they got this very formal portrait taken, which is a special family possession. And then Laura and Almanzo decided to head to Mansfield, Missouri. And they worked very hard. They purchased some land and worked hard to build this home. They did most of the work themselves, cut the lumber, collected the rocks, and built this. This picture is from the 20s. And then here's the more recent picture. It looks very much like it did when the Wilders lived there. And you can visit that. There's a fantastic museum nearby with Pa's fiddle and other family possessions and lots of information about the Ingalls and Wilder families. Laura started writing for the Missouri Ruralist newspaper, and here are a couple of articles. On the left, you can see a picture of a big apple tree with Almanzo standing by it on the cover of the newspaper, and then on the right is one of the articles that Laura wrote, and she became a regular columnist for many years and became editor of the home department. She got some writing advice from her daughter, Rose Wilder Lane, who had become a journalist and was working for a newspaper in San Francisco. And while Rose was living out there with her husband, Gillette Lane, Laura came out to visit them in 1950. And so that's a fascinating episode in Laura's life. You can read about that in the books that she wrote, the collection of letters that she wrote back to Almanzo called West from Home. It's a wonderful, delightful look at Laura and Almanzo's relationship and about some of the amazing sights that Laura saw at the Panama Pacific International Exposition, which was going on in San Francisco at that time. And on the right, you can see a picture of Laura and her son-in-law, Gillette, in the redwood trees near San Francisco. So Pa and Ma and Mary continued to live together in De Smet. Pa died in 1902, and Ma and Mary continued to live together. Mary, of course, could not see, and as Ma got older, she had trouble walking, and Mary said one time that she was Ma's feet and Ma was her eyes. So they had a very sweet relationship. They took in boarders, and Mary did some craft work. She made nets for horses to protect them from mosquitoes and other bugs, and which she sold those to earn some income. And then Ma died in 1924, and Mary died in 1928. And I know that losing those people who were close to her prompted Laura to think about what she had gone through, and around this time she started writing her autobiography, Pioneer Girl. And one of the songs she talks about, Golden Years Are, or one of the songs she mentions, Golden Years Are Passing By, which became the title, gave its title to the book, These Happy Golden Years, is a sweet song helping us think about how we use the days that we have. So, golden years are passing by. Golden years are passing by, happy, happy golden years, passing on the wings of time, these happy golden years. Call them back as they go by, sweet their memories are. Oh, improve them as they fly, these happy golden years. Golden years, golden years, happy golden years. Oh, improve them as they fly, these happy golden years. Golden years are passing by, precious, precious golden years. Let no idle hour be spent with sorrow, grief, and tears. Ah, the good we all may do as the moments pass. To your nobler self be true, reward will come at last. Golden years, happy golden years. Oh, improve them as they fly, these happy golden years. Golden years are passing by, fleeting, fleeting swiftly on. Life is but a passing hour before we know 'tis gone. Soon the parting day will come, day by day it nears. Have you done your duty well these happy golden years? Golden years, happy golden years. Oh, improve them as they fly, these happy golden years. So here's a picture of Laura and Almanzo with some friends in Mansfield. Carrie taught school for a while and worked in some stores in De Smet, and she also spent several years working for newspapers. I love this picture of her on the left with the tennis club in De Smet, and then there's a picture of Carrie in the middle. And in 1912, she married a man named David Swansea, who was a widower with two children, Mary and Harold, and they lived in Keystone, South Dakota. Harold grew up to become one of the workers involved in carving Mount Rushmore, and Carrie died in Rapid City in 1946. Excuse me. Grace also taught school for a while and then married Nathan Dow in 1901 in the parlor of Ma and Pa's home in De Smet. They lived in nearby Manchester, South Dakota. In addition to running their farm, Grace also wrote for local newspapers. I love that picture of Grace in the middle with that fun hat and the boa around her neck. And it's fascinating that that's how that photo was printed, at an angle like that. So I think Grace was a fun person to be around. The Dows had no children, and Grace died in Manchester in 1941. Laura and Almanzo continued to live and work at their Rocky Ridge farm for the rest of their lives, and they made a trip back to De Smet in 1939 as honored guests of the town's Old Settlers' Day. And while they were there, Laura did some research for her books. The Wilders lived through World War I and the Great Depression and World War II together. On a table near where she sat to read, Laura kept a handwritten list of Bible references, and it was a list helping her know where to turn when she was facing different challenges in her life. And you can access a copy of that on our website also. So when Laura talks about the Declaration of Independence in a little town on the prairie, she talks about, in the story, Laura talks about thinking about how in America God is our king, and how we each have to choose to do what is right, because there's no one who can force us, no one who can make us do what's right. And Laura's faith was very important to her, and in one of her Missouri Ruralist articles around after World War I, she made these insightful comments. So here's what she wrote. Here and there, one sees a criticism of Christianity because of the things that have happened and are still going on. Christian civilization is a failure, some say. Christianity has not prevented these things, therefore it is a failure, say others. But this is a calling of things by the wrong name. It is rather the lack of Christianity that has brought us where we are, not a lack of churches or religious forms, but of the real thing in our hearts. If we are eager to help in putting the world to rights, our first duty is to put ourselves right, to overcome our selfishness and be as eager that others shall be treated fairly as we are that no advantage shall be taken of ourselves, to deal justly and have a loving charity and mercy for others as we wish them to have for us. This year, as we celebrate the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, Laura's words mean a lot to me. It's easy for us to wait or to wish that someone else would change, that someone else would do the right thing first. But God calls each of us. We can choose to do the right thing, even if nobody else around us does. So if we want peace, if we want harmony, if we want cooperation in our communities and in our country, we need to be the ones who step out first and set the example and do that, even if other people are struggling. We can demonstrate what it means to be a good citizen, and even more importantly, to be a good Christian in honoring God with the choices that we make. So I appreciate what Laura says there about how we can choose to do what's right, even if other people don't. And another comment that Laura made that is a good reminder to me: the true way to live is to enjoy every moment as it passes, and surely it is in the everyday things around us that the beauty of life lies. Each of our stories is intertwined with the people who have gone before us and the people who come after us. And all of us face various trials, and we don't know what trials are going to come upon us tomorrow. And they often catch us by surprise and challenge us. And so I, having lost my son Avery and gone through other challenges, this is a great reminder that today is the only day we have. Today is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and we can choose to make the most of today. It may be the last day we have for us, or it may be the last day for someone we love, but we can still choose to make this day, make the most of this opportunity, to redeem the time, as Paul says in Ephesians. So this has been fantastic. I really appreciate everyone joining me today. I'm going to close with one more song, and then I'll have a few minutes for some questions. If we don't get to your question, feel free to email us, and we'll be glad to point you in the right direction, try to help you find the information. As I mentioned, we do have a multimedia interactive unit study about the life of Laura Ingalls Wilder, where you can listen to almost all of the songs that Laura talks about in her books, and you can see more historical photographs and find more information about their family. So we will email out information about accessing to that. And yes, the Herbert Hoover Presidential Library does have a collection of photographs and other letters and manuscripts and other documents. And many of those are available. You can pay a small fee and get access to a lot of those. Some of the photographs are available for free to look at on the website, but that is a great resource. All right, so The Sweet By and By, Laura said that this was Pa's favorite hymn, and they sang it at Pa's funeral, and it was also special to my grandfather, Wesley Notgrass, so it's been special to me also. So we're going to close with The Sweet By and By. There's a land that is fairer than day, and by faith we can see it afar, for the Father waits over the way to prepare us a dwelling place there, in the sweet by and by. We shall meet on that beautiful shore, in the sweet by and by. We shall meet on that beautiful shore. We shall sing on that beautiful shore the melodious songs of the blessed, and our spirits shall sorrow no more. Not a sigh for the blessing of rest, in the sweet by and by. We shall meet on that beautiful shore, in the sweet by and by. We shall meet on that beautiful shore, to our bountiful Father above. We will offer our tribute of praise for the glorious gift of His love, and the blessings that hallow our days, in the sweet by and by. We shall meet on that beautiful shore, in the sweet by and by. We shall meet on that beautiful shore. We shall meet on that beautiful shore. Amen.
This has been Exploring History with Ray Notgrass, a production of Notgrass History. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast in your favorite podcast app, and please leave a rating and review so that we can reach more people with our episodes. If you want to learn about new homeschool resources and opportunities from Notgrass History, you can sign up for our email newsletter at exploringhistorypodcast.com. This program was produced by me, Titus Anderson. Thanks for listening.